Father asked me to talk tonight about what I think the state of things is. It's really bad, just in case you didn't know, but I want to talk about the bad, and then also to provide, as Father said, some confidence and hope, because there is actually something coming up on the horizon. One of the things I've been watching, because in addition to doing exorcism work, I also do a fair amount of writing. So keeping a pulse on the culture and even on the state of the church is one of those things where I just watch for patterns. We did a podcast last night, which will be out tomorrow, where we were talking about the 6 stages of modernism. Originally, when I wrote about modernism, I said there were 5 stages. That was taught to me by a teacher of mine, Monsignor Eugene Caven. If you know anything about the history of Catholic University of America, he was the one who fought Charles Curran over the whole contraception issue in the 60s. That's who he was. He parsed modernism into 5 distinct stages. I'm not going to go into all of them. You can read about them. I have an article called Operative Points of View that covers it, but I told Father, I think we've entered into a 6th stage. The superficial stage, the 5th stage, is what we call the superficial stage, the stage where basically all the intellectual gas of the modernist heresy, all the philosophical conclusions have been drawn out, and there's really nothing more. By the late 1960s, writers like Garriga, Lagrange, and Cornelio Fabro, one of my favorites, had completely destroyed the intellectual underpinnings of modernism. But by then the modernists had already gained ascendancy in the church and were running everything, so those writers simply weren't heard. We've been living in this superficial stage for about 50 or 60 years now. The things people say are extraordinarily daft. You get on social media and Catholics, you type in, there are 3 persons in the Trinity, and you get back, no, there are 4. I can't help you. When you're saying obvious things the church has taught for its entire history, and people who claim to be good, knowledgeable Catholics are contradicting you, that's a serious problem. It's a sign that people's theological reasoning is extraordinarily shallow. Part of that is because it's based on the principle of immanence. The standard for truth is transposed from outside objective reality to the interior. Once that happens, our emotions determine our patterns of thinking. It's the effective original sin of concupiscence. If you honestly think that truth is just whatever you think it is, it degenerates into feelings. That's where we're at in our culture. You can't offend anybody if you're not woke. There's a big problem. This is a problem both outside the church and inside it. We've seen this superficiality problem in our own government for 40 or 50 years, policies with no depth of thought, just pandering, and frankly, a lot of it is just evil in the end. The draconian phase, but now, after the superficial stage, both in modernism and in our culture, we're entering the draconian phase. That's phase 6 of modernism. This is when the people in charge, who are basically modernist heretics, ram their belief system down your throat rather than teaching authentic Catholicism. Part of how we know this is the case in the church, we have this gargantuan elephant sitting in the room. It's pink, by the way, but it's gargantuan, and we're not permitted to talk about it. Don't even mention that it's pink. We're entering a stage where people put the blenders on. They don't even want to deal with reality. People are completely disconnected from it. One way we know this, there's a book called The Index of Leading Catholic Indicators. If you haven't read it and want to be depressed, go ahead. It's a bit dated, but it shows that by the late 1990s and early 2000s, the church had declined in every single measurable metric except conversions in Africa. God bless the Africans. And yet we're told this is the new springtime, that things have never been better. The minute you point out that we have a problem, they cancel you. This is part of the draconian phase, a tyranny of fear that if you say anything, you'll get yourself in trouble. I'm still flabbergasted that I gave a conference in New Hampshire where I talked about transgenderism, homosexuality, and all the things that are part of our culture right now, and how every one of them is against the natural law. To my knowledge, only one bishop has said anything about it. And even then it was very soft, not clear, doesn't lay it out, doesn't guide people. The elephant in the room, so we've got this elephant in the room, the modernist problem, a collapse in morality among the clergy. Catholics hardly living their faith. The statistical difference between Catholics cohabiting before marriage and the general population is practically non-existent. Catholics don't seem much different from anybody. The people at the top can't admit that this whole thing has been an unmitigated disaster for 60 years. I'm not trying to criticize specific things. I'm just saying the church is in a bad way, and they won't admit it. But the other part of the elephant, the trunk, so to speak, is that we have to accept that we have people in high places in the church, running parts of it, who are evil. When every single thing you do maximizes damage, that's malice. They promote openly homosexual clergy. They do nothing about entire national episcopates that are schismatic or heretical, yet the minute a priest tries to teach authentic Catholic doctrine, they pull the plug on him. Soft communism then, of course, there are the civil authorities getting more draconian by the day. I tell everybody we're living in soft communism, soft tyranny. Government officials shutting down people's ability to speak the truth is exactly what communists do. When it doesn't matter what justification is given, that's a sign of malice. Our Lady said that about the time it looked like the whole world would become communist, God would intervene. We're there. The deep state, just another name for communism, managed to shut down the worldwide economy in 2 weeks. That tells you how much control they have. We're living in it softly right now, but it's going to get worse. And then the bishops just roll over. The moment civil authorities say anything, the bishops say, okay. That isn't even Catholic. When Christ told the apostles to go and teach all nations, he was telling them their right to teach the faith superseded any civil authority whatsoever. The church has always held that civil authority has no authority over the church. and yet the bishops capitulate constantly. The very fact that transgenderism is rampant and the bishops are nowhere to be found giving moral guidance is a serious problem. Bill Clinton, when he was in office, wanted to know how serious Catholics actually were about their faith, so he had a study done and discovered that 98% of Catholic couples had used or were using contraception. Of course, they made hay of that. And yet that's one of the things we just don't talk about, contraception, abortion, because we don't want to hurt people's feelings. Well, people are dying from it, frankly. If you're going to stand at a pulpit and preach the truth unencumbered, eventually you're going to get canceled. That's just the way it is now. There are prudent ways to go about it and imprudent ways, but the good clergy are going to be attacked more and more. All I'm doing is pointing out, look at the elephant. The elephant is that all the good priests are getting hammered. One of the real problems among the good clergy is that they get no support from the bishops. The moment an accusation comes in, the flimsiest, most absurd accusation imaginable, bishops will throw that priest under the bus at the first opportunity. Not all bishops, but a lot of them. I was talking to one bishop who told me 80% of his clergy have been accused of something, and of that 80%, maybe 3% is actually accurate. The lady is hammering the clergy. There's a general moral to the story. If God gives you a gift and you abuse it, He'll take it from you and give it to somebody else. We see this throughout the Old and New Testaments and in the life of the church. I said 5 years ago, not knowing it would take the form it did, that if lay people didn't stop receiving communion in a state of mortal sin, God would pull the plug and we wouldn't have regular access to the sacraments. It happened. I didn't think it would happen that fast. I've also been telling people if the laity and the bishops don't stop attacking the clergy, we may come to a point where we won't have regular access to a good priest through civil authorities going after priests or any number of other means. It's becoming more draconian, more serious. Spiritual chastisement always precedes physical chastisement. God spanks us spiritually first by pulling the plug on our spiritual goods to some degrees. John Eudes said the worst chastisement God can mete out on a people is giving them bad priests. Well, we're there, except for Father, of course. Restricting the exorcists, bishops are also restricting priests more and more what they can and cannot do. There was a bishop who decided diabolic possession doesn't exist, that it's all mental illness. That's grossly ignorant and flies in the face of the church's entire tradition. 23% of the Gospels deal with Christ driving out demons. One bishop even said, I believe in the devil, just not in my diocese, which happened to be one of the worst dioceses in the nation. I'm sorry, but when someone starts levitating and sticking to the ceiling during a prayer session, that's not a psychological problem. The exorcists are the front line of the battle, and by the grace of God, there are more of them now. A lot of bishops are actually appointing them. That's part of the positive side of all this in my own sessions. And in talking with other exorcists, we seem to confirm the same thing, that we've reached an apex and are now starting to see a decline in the amount of influence the demons have. They've reached their limit. You can see it in the way they're overplaying their hand, driving civil authorities and even people in the church to do things that are completely over the top. When they tell you the border is secure while 200,000 people a month are crossing it, that's just gaslighting. And it happens both inside and outside the church. What we're noticing is that the demons know their time is coming because they know from the history of humanity that God tolerates human dissent only to a certain point. And then He says, that's enough, and pulls the plug. Chastisement is ordered primarily toward correction, not just punishment. And the demons know it's coming because the four sins crying to heaven for vengeance are completely rife willful murder, abortion, euthanasia of the elderly, the sheer amount of killing going on. John Paul tells you was right, we're living in a culture of death, defrauding the labor of his wages. How is taxing a man more than God asks, not defrauding him of his wages? God only wants 10%. Where did government get the idea it's entitled to more than that? Frankly, it's a sign they're doing too much, taking on roles like caring for the poor and widows that should belong to the church and to the wealthy, and having to take money from others to fund it. Sodomy, gay marriage. Sodom and Gomorrah has to be squawking they got wiped out, but at least they weren't trying to marry each other. Oppression of the poor, exactly what communism always does. It wipes out the middle class and grows the poor. That's where we're headed. I don't see how God isn't going to spank us, considering how rife these sins are, not even counting everything else in place. The good news, I always tell people, is that it's going to get worse. What does that mean? Look at what Our Lady has said. She said that about the time it looked like the whole world would become communist, well, it did. She said that if the Pope didn't consecrate Russia, I don't want to get into the debate over whether Pope Francis did or didn't, but Our Lady supposedly said in 1929 to Sister Lucia, I'm still trying to track down the authenticity of this quotation, that in the end the Pope would consecrate Russia, but it would be too late to avert what it was meant to avert. Think about that. All God wanted was a 5-minute prayer by a single man consecrating Russia to the Immaculate Heart, and we wouldn't be going through any of this. That tells you how efficacious prayer is. At Akita, she said cardinal would rise against cardinal, a bishop against bishop. And we're seeing that in fighting now between those upholding church teaching and those going the way of all flesh. As they used to say, this isn't new. Read St. Peter Damian's The Book of Gomorrah to see this has been a recurring problem in the church. All these predictions are coming true. And that tells us something. If everything Our Lady and our Lord predicted would happen, if we didn't consecrate Russia has come true, then everything else in those prophecies and apparitions is also true. There will be an era of peace. There will be a resurgence of the church whose glory will almost surpass any time in history. We just have to get through the chastisement and come out the other side. We can also see that God is starting to provide what we call prevenient graces, graces that come before the grace he plans to give, preparing the way. Inside the church, one reason things are becoming more draconian is that the modernists have lost the intellectual argument. Because they're in authority, the only thing left to them is force. They don't persuade anymore. They just try to force their way. That's always a sign of desperation, a sign they're coming to their end. This will play out over the next 15 to 20 years, and it's going to be ugly in the church unless God intervenes beforehand. But the shift is starting because the younger clergy are, in many cases, far more solid and orthodox than their older counterparts. Priests will tell you can see it coming. I first began to realize things were going to get really draconian when I read an article by Richard McBrien, arguing that the fact seminarians coming out now are more orthodox is not a good thing, that something needs to be done about it. Right there. That's what happens when your ideas are an abject failure and you can no longer persuade anyone. So the only thing left is to force it. We see the same pattern in government. Not persuading us, just ramming things through. A 1.7 trillion, that's a boatload of money, and it didn't make 1.7 million people millionaires. The clergy coming up now are more solid. They desire to know the truth. The young are attracted to Orthodox Catholic liturgy and teaching. They don't carry the baggage of the generation that's 50 or 60 and older with no attachment to the last 50 years. They just want the truth. I tell people we're living in a time warp. We're told we have to get with modern times. But the liturgy some insist on, the vestments, the churches, the preaching, the music, it's all stuck in the 1960s. That tells you something. The liturgy has to be perennial, eternal, able to appeal to every generation independent of what's going on in society or the church. That generation is getting older and dying out. Eventually, the people rising through the ranks will largely be the Orthodox priests. There will always be some bad ones, but it's a sign things are going to get better. Those young priests are going to suffer a great deal before they're able to do much real good. As I mentioned, they're going to get canceled. Part of prudence is knowing your circumstances, which requires the virtue of circumspection, what we now call situational awareness. St. Thomas says it's the first virtue corrupted. You see it when people get angry and lose all sense of where they are, screaming at their kid in the grocery line. The same thing happened in the 1960s. People insisted modern man was different from all his predecessors and needed a whole new this and that. Really, less than a generation earlier, millions upon millions had been wiped out. Stalin killed 20 million in Ukraine. Mao won 20 million, Hitler millions more. Modern man wasn't somehow better or different. It was a kind of elation, maybe some sort of collective PTSD from the Second World War, but it wasn't a real grasp of the actual circumstances. There's a document from 1961 from the Congregation for Religious, sent to every head of religious congregation worldwide. I keep bringing it up because I want people to pay attention to it. It has two essential points. First, stop ordaining men with homosexual tendencies and pedophiles. In 1961. So this idea that modern man is different. No, the members of the church needed reform. It wasn't everything else that needed reforming. Second, the document was strict that no one should be in seminary or religious life unless living a chaste life. Those failing against the sixth commandment were to be shown the door. That's an indicator that clarity was lacking at the time. But it's becoming clear now. This isn't a new springtime. If anything, the abuse scandal put an end to that talk. The church is, in a sense, in survival mode. And it's only getting smaller. The number of Catholics leaving is astounding. If things get uglier geopolitically, I think a lot of Catholics will defect. But I want to end with hope. The good clergy coming up, the young people coming up, that's hope. The demons themselves seem to be talking as if God is stripping them of their power. The spiral downward in the moral life of our culture is the result of moral inertia. It's been rolling downhill so hard and so long that it just keeps going under its own momentum. Just when you think people have hit bottom, someone comes up with something worse. But that's a sign the demons know their time is short. Part of the sign they're losing influence is that they're losing control of the information blackout. People are starting to discover the truth of what's actually going on. Occult means hidden, and it's losing its hidden aspect. The Satanists themselves are out in the open now, announcing their rituals in public squares. You can watch, I wouldn't recommend it, the dedication of a tunnel in Switzerland, a full-blown ritual to Baphomet, with world leaders watching as if they'd seen it 100 times before. A friend of mine said they probably have. But the fact that it's coming into the open also means it can finally be addressed. Demons hide things and block people from reflecting on them. But that's starting to break down, both in the church and outside it. We're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. If we knew the full corruption of our leaders, we'd be shocked. The elephant in the room can't be dealt with until we admit he's in the room. The church right now is like a drunk. We won't get it straightened out until we admit we have a problem and actually address it the way the church has always said these things need to be addressed. But that's coming. Younger clergy are speaking out more, which is good. Young people are having large families again. Beautiful. People want to lead good Catholic lives and get themselves and their families to heaven. Things are changing slowly. The church is shrinking, but what's left is going to be more solid. We're going to have a small, cohesive, very strong group of solid Catholics. They'll probably be persecuted, but that's because God desires a very high place in heaven for them. External strife, pain, and suffering are actually a sign of God's favor, carrying the burden of the state of the church. The state of the country and the world, it's a burden, but we can't become over-focused on it. We have to stay focused primarily on God, not let it distract us from Him. If we carry it meritoriously, in the end it will be to our merit and to a higher place in heaven. The suffering of the young clergy going through this now is to their eternal merit, even if it brings no recognition in this life. That's passing. In the next life, that's when everyone will admire those who suffered. So when the suffering comes, when we go through a chastisement, our attitude has to be, this is for my purification, and I'm going to do it as best I can for the sake of my sanctification. If we survive the chastisement and come out the other end, God will let us enjoy the glory of the church. It's coming. We know it's coming. The entire reason God made man was for rightly ordered worship. That's why He made us, and that will be restored. God is not going to be mocked. He's not going to be denied what He wants. He allows these things only for the sake of purification, to make saints of us, and then He will restore it. It won't be easy in the process, but we have to have confidence that it's going to come. In possession cases, some cases drag out for years. There are 6 stages of liberation, and in stage 5 there are 4 parts right before the person is liberated. In the 4th part, the demon has given up everything he needs to give up. He's completely subject to the exorcist, completely obedient, does whatever he's told, and there can be a stretch, 2 or 3 months, where it seems like nothing is happening and you wonder why God isn't acting. We are.